It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Elijah Stevens, and we are going to be discussing his film, Send Proof. Elijah, it is truly an honor, sir. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, huh?
Well, this is the first time Elijah and I are meeting. I know he's going to be brand new to many of you, so we're going to kick this off by having him share a little bit of the Elijah Stevens origin story. So for all of us meeting you for the first time in this talk today, what are a few things we should know about you?
Well, I grew up Reformed. I was cessationist, went to a Reformed school, studied philosophy and psychology there, started having questions about God and miracles, went to the Vineyard movement, became a Vineyard pastor, felt a call to go through BSSM at Bethel in Reading. So I went through 3 years of that and then got called to make a movie on miracles with medical evidence. And while I was doing that, I got 2 degrees. One's in apologetics and the other's in science and religion.
Wow, you don't sit down and just not do anything. That's an impressive amount of stuff to fit into a small time frame. I know you've written a book as well, and I'm always curious when I talk to somebody who creates and expresses in multiple mediums and formats, like how does juggling that for you creatively work? Is one form of expression easier than the other? How does the spirit lead differently? Just contrast filmmaking versus book writing.
Oh gosh. Well, the easiest is podcast because you just talk. But I think book writing is way easier than making a film. The learning curve. I knew how to write, so I did not know how to turn cameras on or edit and stuff like that. But I filled the book was this cry. I used to be in the Vineyard, and I noticed the reason, let's say, churches who had a theology of healing didn't see it is because small group leaders and senior pastors weren't trained how to lead ministry time. And so they were scared and they never created space for the Holy Spirit to move. And so it's coaching them on how to keep things safe and healthy because they're afraid of weird granny doing something that just violates people. And so, yeah, it walks people through that process is what the book's about.
Well, and that's one of the interesting things in terms of I feel like being scared to let God move in the midst of a service is you have to let go of some sense of control because you actually don't know what's going to happen. And so getting past that threshold can be definitely a challenge. I feel like once we get in a comfort zone in that space, then we're happy to keep doing it. But until we're willing to take that leap those first few times, it can be quite horrifying. So like, oh no. It could all go awry, and any of us who've been in charismatic spaces any length of time, it can be a little bit controversial for people to move in gifts, people to get healed. I remember when my brother-in-law started out in the Vineyard like 10, 12 years ago, my wife and I are like, man, did they join a cult? All this crazy stuff is happening. And I always say, because God has a sense of humor now, this is the side of the church I make my living in. So it's, yes, I'm definitely more of a card-carrying charismatic myself. At this point, in terms of the film, like what was the problem you wanted to solve, the question you wanted to answer, like what, as you set out, like what was in your mind that you had to tackle?
Well, when I went to BSSM, the senior pastor I used to work for in the Vineyard left the faith. He says there's no God, no miracles, no evidence. And so while I was in my first year of BSSM, I was just praying like, God, I want a strategy to partner with you to be a catalyst for the next great awakening. I hunger for that. And this film kind of came to mind, but it was going nowhere. Like I put out a few testimony, like website to collect testimonies, but that went nowhere. And then while I'm in third year, I get a text at my house that I'm in my house. And my friends text me that Sean Bolts had called my name out at school. I'm like, well, I'm not even in school. And then I'm thinking, is this really me? And then I get another text that he called out Allison and Elijah. And so I drive to the school and he gives me this prophetic word where he tells me my name and my birth date and that I lived in Chattanooga, grew up in Georgia, my wife's name, that she's an occupational therapist. And he's like, God's commissioned you to go make this film. It'll touch lots of doctors' lives. And so I go and I start looking for a team. And Randy Clark has started the Global Medical Research Institute, and so I raise money on Kickstarter, and we raise about $135,000, and then we start filming, and we start looking for cases. And this thing is way harder than I could ever imagine, because we wanted cases we could put in peer-reviewed medical journals, which, if you gave me every document I need right now, takes 2 years. So this is not a fast process. Cases we film fall apart, and then we run out of money, and then me and my wife have to go, all right, are we all in on this? And just literally empty our retirement accounts to finish it out. And it's just taking a time, but it's like, if God tells you to do it, you got to do it. So, yeah.
Well, that was one of the really interesting aspects of the film that you drew out well, was just the difficulty of getting something verified, because it's not just the time aspect. There are also many things at stake in terms of insurance companies and doctors and medical institutions' reputations. Right. And like, you would think, well, you just need somebody to look at it and say, oh yeah, it looks like, wow, this is completely different. We can't explain it.
Yeah.
Must have been something miraculous. But there's a lot more intangible
Right.
stuff at stake. Was that a surprise? Did you think people would be more willing or able to help you verify things along the way?
I did. I thought everyone would be happy, and it just, the moment you cross into, could this be God, everyone freezes, because, like, it puts you in a spotlight, and all of the judgment of the skeptic comes into play. Of you're conning people, you should talk like a scientist. Even to just say, I don't have a naturalistic explanation, it puts people in very difficult places. So, yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
And in terms of starting the film at Reading, or at Bethel and Reading, like, obviously it was practical because that's where you're based. But for the film, but also for you, like, what did coming to Reading mean for you in terms of coming out of the vineyard to Bethel and telling this story? Like, why was beginning in Reading important for you?
Hmm. Well, the reason I went to Reading is because I had a dream where Bill Johnson says, well, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, plant churches that see signs and wonders. And he says, come to California. So I felt very called into this. And so that's a part of the journey. But Reading is not set up in the way you would think it is for what I was trying to do. Like, it took a long time. We had to reorganize entire things to get GMRI even at Bethel. And so um, it it wasn't like, man, you're just walking into something. And a lot of stuff is not set up for the type of testimony collecting we needed. And so what the whole premise of the film is to shift the mindset of the charismatic movement to send in proof. Because a lot of people, they will get healed. We will call them up and they're like, I don't want to go back to the doctor. Well, we'll pay for you. Well, I'm busy and I got this going on. And I'm like, it's an hour. It's 1 hour of your life, buddy. And so, yeah, it's been quite the, like, all of my expectations were just like shattered with this. Yeah.
Well, and in terms of people collecting data, like, Randy is one of the few
Yeah.
in our circles that actually makes a concerted effort to try to collect
Yeah.
medical records and connect the dots. And so I'm glad to know that there are others trying to pull that together to really tell the full scope of these stories with actual proof. Why include both kind of, card carrying charismatic believers and skeptics? Because I felt like that was something that really made your film stand out. A lot of folks who will have seen your film have probably seen some of Darren Wilson's films and some of the other films kind of in this space. But many of them don't go that extra step of talking with people who would be opposed to the supernatural, or really doubt that people actually get healed. So from a storytelling perspective, talk about the balance that helps you to bring in the film.
Well, from a storytelling perspective, that's the best way to tell a story, is to take in the people who disagree with you most and present them in the best light possible. If you think you have something substantial, then you need to hear the other side and let them say it. Um, at a fundamental level, I believe one of our weaknesses in kind of our streams is the voice of the teacher is a little too low compared to the other five. And what the teacher brings is critical thinking. So you hear from all sides and then you make an inference to the best explanation. And so I wanted to show what that looks like, because I think that's where most people are at outside of our circles, is they're asking those questions. And so I wanted it to be a bridge where people could go, all right, I have at least been exposed to the dialogue these groups are having in a healthy way where I understand at some of the highest levels the questions being asked.
And one of the people we get to meet in the film is Bruce Vanetta. He's actually a Destiny Image author. I love how you use him to kind of connect people from the midpoint in the film to the latter part of the film. Tell us a little bit about Bruce and why he was important to the film.
Well, Bruce was a diesel mechanic, and a truck fell on him, and he had his a large portion of his intestines removed, to a point where he was told he had small bowel syndrome, which is where you have so little intestine that you can no longer like feed yourself. No matter how much food you put in your body, you're not going to be nourished. So he's dying, and he gets prayer by a guy named Bruce Carlson, and is healed, and they record how much he has left. And so that is the story I wanted to put in about him, because he's tied into something else in the film, and I don't want to give it away because it's a big reveal, but I think it's highly important to go, man, well, these types of cases are documentable. And in the film, we also say, look, we want to keep inspecting, and not the technology doesn't even exist yet to go back and do another scan of his intestines. But that's a problem with miracle research, is sometimes the technology doesn't exist, or sometimes there's a test. If you knew a miracle was going to happen, you would go, let's do this test now, because then it will prove it later. And so you don't have the test on the front end sometimes.
And in terms of people responding to the film, uh, is there anything that comes through most often in terms of what stood out for them or how it challenged them? How have people been responding?
Well, most people really like it, especially skeptics, because even if they are skeptics, they're like, I cried. It opened me up to considering this, and that's a win for me. A lot of us Christians go, let's present something so much that they fall to their knees and they cry out, I was wrong about everything. And I think maybe just showing an honest perspective to them in a way that's not propaganda is such a win. And sometimes we try to hit too hard at stuff. And I want to subtly do this over years. I think there'll be more films in me. So.
And in terms of the people you got to meet and interact with along the way, who were the people that really impacted you most, challenged you most? Because again, you didn't just stick with people who believe the same way as you do or who are pro healing and pro miracles. So
yeah,
who are the folks that really made a difference in your journey with the
people
film?
who made a difference for me, I think, is someone I interview in the film. Her name's Jacqueline Duffin, and she researched miracles at the Vatican as a skeptic. She's like, these people had the best science to date at every point in history. She was a medical historian. But she told me this, and this has challenged even my belief. She said, one of the things that happen to Christians over time is that a cure to a disease will come out. Like, let's take tuberculosis. Everybody's like, we're dying from this. If you get healed, it's a miracle from prayer. And then a cure comes out, And then people stopped documenting cures of this without treatment. So in parts of Africa, you still can't get treatment for this, but you can catch the disease and then go, all right, well, I got prayer and now I'm healed. And I dismiss miracles like that sometimes. If there is even a possible treatment that exists, even if the person got it or not, I just kind of go, eh. And she, through her lens, as a skeptic, as an atheist, taught me, hey, you Christians throw miracle claims out way too fast. And I thought, wow, that's super fun and super helpful to understand. Yeah.
And in terms of your journey with the film, like, what did you learn about yourself? How did it stretch you? I mean, like you said,
Mhm.
you didn't know what you didn't know going into it in terms of
Yeah.
making a film. So on this side of the journey, how did that process change you?
Yeah. So in the film, I talk about being abused. So I was beat for hours at a time, and I got PTSD, and I went through BSSM, and I'm like, I'm a fairly healthy person, and then I had to go into this process of putting myself in public, where you get public attack, and I had to grow in my identity in Christ through that and through rejection. As you start reaching out to people, there's tons of rejection. It's just, um, it was a next level stretch. And then the learning curve in film was so steep. I had to learn, how do you do a Kickstarter? How do you get graphic design done? How do you turn on a camera? How do you turn on a mic? Editing, and then marketing and distribution and legal and insurance. And all of this I learned on the back end when I should be doing stuff 3 or 4 years ago. And so I learned perseverance, I guess.
Awesome. I always love to hear what people, especially with a film for the first one.
Yeah.
You have no idea what you're getting into. It's so much harder than
Yeah.
anybody ever
Yeah.
thinks. I mean, just raising the funding for a film is usually a hurdle that's very difficult to overcome. Elijah, I love the film. It was fantastic in terms of films in this space that look at miracles. It's probably one of the best films I've seen in the past 5 years. I know my audience is going to want to check it out. So, in terms of connecting with you, buying the film, where do we discover that on the web?
It's on sendproof.com. So SENDproof.com. And if you have a miracle testimony and you think there's before and after evidence, go on there. There's a button to click, fill out the form, and we'll help you collect your doctor's records. You don't even need to have them, at your house or something. We can do that.
And like we do with every episode, we'll have links in the show notes to places where you can connect with Elijah and get your very own copy of the film so you can stream it to your heart's content. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Elijah Stevens. Once again, the film we talked about today was Send Proof. If you'd like to find out more, head on over to the film's website. You can find that at sendproof.com. And Elijah, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks so much.